All right, so this is the soft cut linoleum. What you're gonna need to get started, first you can actually outline directly on your block whatever your idea was for your assignment based on the texture that you've chosen. You can use a pencil or a pen. I would recommend a wooden pencil because lead pencils or mechanical pencils are too sharp. Like the lead is too pointy and it will actually kind of damage the block a little bit. So you want to use a wooden pencil because it's a little bit duller and it won't damage the block. Or you can use a ballpoint pen as well. It won't affect the print for it to have that pen ink on your block, so you can go ahead and use a ballpoint pen. It applies really smooth to the block as well. So either one of those is fine. Let me see if I have one of those kind of cheapo pens. You don't want to use like a Sharpie, or you don't want to use a like a gel pen or anything, but just like a cheapo simple pen. You know, you can write really smoothly directly on the block, and you can use that as a guide for what you want to cut. So you have these handles. Again, I know a lot of you did this in comp, so this is a review, but it might have been a while, so I want to kind of go back over it again. You also have these, they're nibs, and they come in different sizes. So this is the very smallest one. You can see it's a very small, well, maybe you can't, you can. Very small V shape. This one is a large U shape, so it's good for cutting out big areas at a time. And then this one is sort of a medium V shape. It works in a similar manner as with the large U. So to use these, you want to take the rounded side. You want to loosen up the handle. If you loosen it too much, it will actually come off, and we want to avoid that. It's okay if it happens, but the problem is there's loose pieces in here, these two little loose pieces, and if it comes off all the way, sometimes those get lost. It just drops on the floor, they bounce somewhere, and we never see them again. So just try to avoid pulling it all the way off. Just loosen it enough so that you can hear the little pieces shaking around in there. Then you want to take the nib, rounded side, and put it inside and then twist to tighten it. The way that it works is that rounded edge goes between the two pieces inside the handle, and then you tighten it to lock it in place. Now, kind of cutting techniques, you never want to cut towards your body. You never want to be holding the cutting tool going this way towards your body. It's pretty sharp. I mean, it's not like razor sharp, but it's pretty sharp. It's sharp enough to cut you, and you really don't want to be cutting towards yourself in case you slipped, you were applying pressure, and that could somehow gouge you. That would be awful. Halloween's over. We don't want any gory scenes in here, so don't cut yourselves with these tools. The other hazard is not cutting toward, that feels a little awkward to me to even cut towards your body that way, so that's not something that I worry too much about. What I do worry about is cutting towards your hand. So like say you were holding your block still and then cutting into your block like this and going straight towards your finger. Well, all it takes is one slip, bam, you've cut the skin on your finger. And the problem with these tools is they're sharp enough to cut you, but dull enough to hurt really bad. It would kind of like puncture, bruise you. So just don't ever hold the block like this and go towards your hand. You'd want to hold it back here and go away from your hand. Does that make sense? Cool. And it's really tempting once you're in the zone and you're carving, you're holding it, you're moving, blah, blah, blah. But just really try to stay focused and pay attention to turn and shift your block rather than trying to just kind of turn your hand. The next thing is the technique for actually holding the tool. We don't want to hold it necessarily like a pencil or a paintbrush because that gives us a weird angle. We're like jabbing down into the block instead of skimming across the top. So to hold it, you want to take the rounded part and put it kind of in the palm of your hand, and then you're going to basically support it, like pinching it with these two fingers, and then wrap these around the bottom. So you're holding it like this rather than like this. That just gives us a better angle to skim across the top of the plate rather than gouging, or into the block rather than gouging down into it. So just let's say, for example, we want this circle to print. So I would cut around the outside of the circle because that's what would be black, or whatever color ink we're printing in. We do have several color options, but you're cutting around it to create an outline. And then let's say we want to remove what's around it. I would switch nibs because this is going to be a large area to remove and I don't want to waste time. So I'm going to replace this with a different nib, tighten it back up, and then use this tool to remove larger areas at a time so that the circle prints and what's around it is removed. It would be the white of the paper. Just kind of going slow, trying to take out neat areas at a time, turning the block. So that would be sort of how to show a shape. You see here some cross hatching, some textured hatching that I did down here. So using the different variety of size of tools, you can achieve different things like this and just kind of trim around your shapes. All right, so let's flip over. It's gonna be like a cooking show. Now the completed product. You don't get to see the process, but here it is. So this block's already been carved. You see I used like those small lines to show texture here. I removed the background. I purposely used a small tool there to achieve these kind of noise lines in the background. What you want to do before you print and start inking is get rid of all this. I call it shredded cheese because that's exactly what it looks like. You want to get rid of all this because it will get caught on the roller and get it'll leave little spots on your roller and spots on the block. So any of this little debris from etching, you want to sweep away and get rid of it. Don't want any of that getting involved. I'm going to set my tools to the side, and now I'm going to show you the printing and inking process. So we have a pretty big variety of colors. You'll need an inking board. This is just a piece of like wooden MDF board. That is located, you see over there underneath the printing press, there are several drawers that are open. This is located in those drawers. It's called inking boards. It's labeled on the drawer. You'll also need a brayer. That's what this little roller is. The technical term for this is a brayer. It's just a soft rubber, well, hard rubber tool to apply the ink to the block. You'll need the chipboard, just like when we used the ink on the last project, and then obviously the ink. If you, again, look over there, there's a drawer that's labeled Relief Supplies. That's where you'll find these. That's where you'll find the different nibs that you need, and that's where you'll also find the inks. So I've brought over 2 colors of ink because I want to actually show you how to mix them together so that you're able to use that technique if you want to. It's not required that you use that for your project, but if you want to use it, I want you to know how. So if we are mixing together a dark color and a light color, color mixing 101, what do we start with? The light, that's right. So I'm going to start with the yellow. Notice I got 2 pieces of chipboard because I wouldn't want to scoop in the yellow, put it down, and then use that same one to scoop in the brown because it's obviously going to mix. So opening up the yellow, you can see the ink in there. It's a little bit of a different consistency than the Intaglio ink, so please be sure that you're using one that says block printing ink on the outside. Don't use the Intaglio ink for this. It's way too thin, it won't apply correctly, and it won't print correctly. So make sure you're getting block printing ink from the drawer that says Relief Supplies, okay? Don't mix them up. So I'm gonna use this just like I used before to get out some ink. I'm gonna start with about this much. You guys can see about how much that is. And what we wanna do is apply it to the inking board. And we want to apply it in what we call a ribbon, and we want to sort of make that ribbon the width of the roller. So see the brayer, I laid the brayer there, and it's just a little bit wider than that brayer. I'm going to set that piece to the side. I'm going to open up the brown because that's our darker color, and then I'm going to use a separate piece of chipboard to scoop out a little bit of brown, and then I'm going to mix it on the board with the yellow to create kind of like a dark gold kind of color, hopefully, or light brown. So I'm scooping and then pushing it back onto the plate. Scooping, pushing back, kind of like putty. You're just using the chipboard to blend them together until it looks like it's good and smooth. Notice I'm trying to keep it contained in a pretty small area. I'm not going all over the plate with it. I'm trying to keep scooping it and keep the ink contained to one area, more or less. I don't want to spread it thin all over the plate or the board. And then once I get it blended together, I'm going to redo my ribbon just like that. And I'm going to scoop some of this ink to the side because I can tell it's going to be a little bit too much, and I might need that for a second, third, fourth print. Yes. All right, so this is applied here. I'm going to use the brayer, and I'm going to roll it through the ink. Trying to keep it contained to a relatively small area. I'm not inking the entire board because that's going to dry the ink out. We want the ink to stay in a pretty small concentrated area, because if you're doing it all over, that's spreading this ink super thin. So I'm just keeping it in like a pretty small rectangle, and I'm rolling it like this. Now, the reason that we put this on the board is not to ink the board, it's to ink the roller. So we're just using this as a way to get consistent ink all over this brayer. So you can see I'm not just going like this and not picking up, I'm picking up and going back down, so it's covering more sides of this brayer. You hear that noise? Do you remember what it's called, Samantha? The Velvet Whisper. Creepiest term ever, but I swear it's a real printmaking term. That little noise you hear is the Velvet Whisper. If you do not hear that noise, that most likely means you do not have enough ink on the brayer to dry. If it's really loud, like a velvet roar, instead of a whisper, you've got too much ink and it's gonna have too much on your block. So this is actually a really good amount of ink. That's why I scooped some of that to the side. I thought it might end up being too much. So I'm gonna scoot this over so I can show you how to ink your block. I'm gonna lay this here, make sure there's no debris around it to get caught in the sticky ink, and then I'm gonna use the brayer to apply it directly onto the block. I'm gonna roll it several times, do it maybe from different directions, and then I'm gonna come back and get more ink. You don't wanna, the way that the brayer works is it picks ink up once it starts to get low. So eventually you would just kind of be removing ink from the block if you just keep rolling it on. So you need to kind of refill your ink on the brayer and then reapply it to the block. You can see I'm going in on the block in multiple directions, trying to lay down my ink. And you should be able to see see how it looks like it's kind of glittering on the screen? It's sort of got that dappled effect, the way that the ink is sitting on the surface of the block, and that's what you want. You should see that ink kind of, not bubbling up, but just sort of having that texture on the surface of the block. All right, so now I've got a good amount of ink on the block, and this process is different from the intaglio process, because in intaglio, which part of in the print, what goes first on the press? The plate, correct. And in this process, we actually put the paper on the press first. And this is a little press. You guys can see it on my desk. It's kind of hard to see it in the image, but it's just a little press. You want to open it up, and you want to take the piece of paper you're using and lay it down on the press bed first. Then you want to take your print and center it as much as possible on the piece of paper. Now, just like in relief intaglio, if not more, in this, it's important that once you sit it down, even if it's crooked, don't move it, because the ink is already touching the surface of this. It's already transferring, and if you move it, it's going to have like a ghost image and then the real image. So I'm going to take this, now that it's been set down on the paper, I'm going to slide it a little bit further back towards the edge of the press bed, and then I'm going to carefully bring down the press on top, put a little bit of body weight into it and apply pressure, and then pull it back up. Now, especially on small blocks, using a press is not totally necessary. We can apply pressure with our hand. I also have wooden spoons. You can put the block down first, then put the paper on top, and then kind of burnish it with spoon, and that helps apply even pressure with a smooth surface, and then pull that off. That works as well, but the press is super easy. So I'm gonna pull this back, and this is the big reveal. Now we have our little golden bumblebee. Kind of hard to see in the, there we go. So, reverse image of the block that was inked. Now, between printing, you do want to wash off your block. The reason is this ink dries pretty quickly, and once the ink starts to dry on the block, it's covered in ink and it won't accept more ink. Basically, that spot is going to remain dry. It won't take more ink. So you want to wash the block off between printing each one so that you don't have dry spots. Re-ink it and print again. So this process, the inking and printing process, is way quicker than intaglio, not nearly as messy. The only other things I want to show you, these prints, because you don't wet your paper, they don't need to be put under the boards to dry. I would say, depending on the size, but yours will be bigger than mine, probably we'll put them on the drying rack over here. So the only things that you need to know now are, if you have not mixed a color, if you use a pure color, pure yellow, pure blue, pure black, whatever it is you're using, if it's not mixed, the next thing that you would do, which I'm not going to do because this is mixed, but you would take the chipboard that you used and you're going to scrape it back up, See all that ink that's kind of gathering back up? That's a good significant amount. And you're going to scrape it back into the jar if it's a pure color. Obviously, you guys know this is a mixed color. We would not want to scrape this into the yellow or into the brown because it doesn't match. So please don't try to mix them up like that. But you would try to scrape it all up and then get all this ink. See how much ink that is? Holy moly, that's a lot of ink. So you would want to take that and put it back into the jar if it were a pure color. Black, blue, red, whatever it is that hasn't been mixed. You want to scrape your board to get all that extra off so that we're conserving as much as possible, and then put that back into the jar. You'll then wash the board completely, wash the chipboard, and wash your brayer off completely at the sink and let those dry. Again, I could have gone ahead and done all 5 of these at once with this one inking board. So you don't need to clean the board up between prints. You just need to wash and dry off your plate, your block between prints. So I could have gone ahead and done 3 or 4 more of these at one time. I may have had to add a little bit of ink as I go just to replenish it. But you can just use that same ink setup multiple times once you've got it all put out. Questions about relief? Okay. If you think of them as we go, we'll address those as we go.